Hello. In July of last year, it was announced that in the Republic of Ireland, students studying for their junior cert would be exposed to teaching on pornography and also the promotion of gender ideology. There's been a consultation. Many parents have expressed concerns about that, and so too now many church leaders. In fact, more than 200 church leaders have signed a letter expressing their concerns. That letter was written by Pastor John Ahern of All Nations Church in Dublin and the Reverend Mark Loughridge of New Life Fellowship in Letterkenny, County Donegal. They are with me now. John, Mark, thank you both for joining me today. Can I just ask you, what prompted you to write this letter to the Education Minister and to the Children's Minister that's got so much attention?
Well, Ciarán, there's been, I suppose, an ongoing frustration with many Christians throughout this nation who feel that the education system has been gradually veering towards this direction, to the point whereby the Christian faith of our children is being opposed or subverted. Maybe not deliberately. I understand that, but certainly for us as Christians who hold to a biblical view of marriage, of gender and sexuality, obviously there's been some major issues, and I think most pastors have been, getting calls from their congregants who are deeply concerned about their children, and so really this letter was just written in response to that. Certainly for any of us that have been in the ministry for any period of time, we know the devastating consequences of pornography in the lives of people. And, we've had to deal with many people who were exposed to it as young children. And, for some, it's been a lifelong struggle, and with really devastating consequences for their relationships and just mentally and spiritually.
I should say that for people watching this who are outside of Ireland, the junior cert is essentially the UK equivalent of, or the Irish equivalent of the UK's GCSE, isn't it? So you're talking about
Yes.
Teenagers who would be maybe 14, 15,
14,
16, yeah. And this is becoming more widespread, isn't it, in terms of the promotion of gender ideology? It's there's clinics in Crumlin dealing with children who have been exposed to or concerned about themselves and how they view themselves. So this is quite a widespread issue, isn't it? And reflected not only in the respondents to the signatories to your letter, but also many parents were also responding to the consultation earlier on to express their concerns.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has struck us over the last number of years is the increasing sexualization of education, and we recognize that children need to be taught on these matters and how to handle them, but there's a framework in which to do that. And a good way of doing that, a healthy way of doing that. And I think what has concerned us is that in a whole host of different ways, and it's not simply these latest proposals, but over the last while, there have been a number of different areas that where the sexualization of children in education has been a concern. Just last year, there was a survey done by some teachers and parents of the literature that children were being required to read, and the literature that Irish school children were required to read. Their conclusion was that 52% of the leaving cert, that would be the Irish equivalent of A levels.
A levels, yeah.
52% of the leaving cert recommendations had inappropriate, graphic, and offensive sexual content. And there's a whole host of statistics can go with that, but it's the pool of literature from which teachers are to pick the books that the children read is a pool that looks fairly polluted to start with, and then we have these recent proposals, and I fully agree. I teach in a school, I teach RE. couple of classes a week. And I think children need to be spoken to about pornography and the dangers of it and the damage it does to relationships and our brains and its addictive power, and how it damages our expectations and how it skews our relationships. And the damage needs to be done, but there are ways to do that that don't actually expose children to the material itself, or that familiarize them with terminology that causes them to be curious and sends them looking to find out to things. So there are ways to do it. And one of the things that we've been concerned about at different levels, I suppose, is the use of whether it's anti-bullying programs or whether it's health programs or whether it's literature choices. There almost seems to be a Trojan horse element in which agendas are being smuggled in to the education system. And we wanted to, I suppose, again, flag up the nature of this.
Sure. I mean, it's the relationships and sexual education element forms part of, I think, I'm not sure entirely where the boundaries are, but part of the social, personal, and health education curriculum seem intertwined. But it does seem almost that there is this kind of suggestion that there's good pornography and perhaps bad or less good pornography, which is quite a strange approach. But your letter has been signed by more than 200 church leaders at my last count. That represents an awful lot of people, doesn't it?
Well, it would represent tens of thousands of Christians throughout the country. And I think it's interesting that it's quite a varied group of ministers. You know, there's Reformed, there's Presbyterian, there's Charismatic, Pentecostal, you know, Evangelical, etc. You know, but I think the fact that so many of them were willing to sign it was an expression of the depth of feeling and concern about this issue, because we're dealing with young children who are very impressionable at a very impressionable stage of their lives. And as Mark just said there, you know, just delving into the world of pornography, you know, with this naive view that there's such a thing as harmless or a positive approach to this. When we understand, you know, the spiritual implications, you know, as well as the emotional and mental implications of getting involved in this, you know, as well as the whole, you know, the reality is, and it's not just in Ireland, we're seeing this throughout the Western world, where there's almost like a weaponization of the education system to the point where it's no longer education, it's indoctrination. And certainly for any of us who hold to a biblical view of marriage, gender, sexuality, etc., our children are being taught things that are completely contrary to what we believe and hold to be sacred. And you know, we believe in the power of a seed. And as a consequence of these changes, there are going to be seeds that are going to be sown that are going to bring a terrible harvest in the lives of these children. And so, like I said, I mean, I had a member of my church contact me a couple of weeks ago, very, very upset, because his child is in first year. She's probably maybe 13 years of age, 12 years of age. And they were teaching the gender spectrum on a pie chart through maths. And so, you know, you're asking yourself, is this about maths or is it actually about an ideology?
And you can't withdraw your child from maths, right?
No, of course not. And I'm sure, you know, the politicians at certain stages have mentioned, well, parents can bring their children out, you know, if there's something that's contrary to maybe what they believe, not necessarily in maths now. And this is I suppose, the seditious nature of some of these policy changes, whereby it seems like it's seeping into so many subjects, along with the whole trans ideology again, which it's, I mean, I think it's important to understand. I mean, as believers, it's neither scientific nor in line with our theology as Christians, and so. You know, there's certainly a very subversive nature to what is being taught, and And so, like I said, many parents, and I think just about every one of the pastors I've spoken, and there's church leaders from both north and south have signed this. And so I do believe there's a lot of feeling of really being in the same boat with regards to this whole agenda, and so there really is a lot of concern about this, and this is why we wrote the letter and we addressed, because it's not just about pornography, it's about the wider issues of the sexualization of education and the sexualization of young children, and ultimately, it's certainly my conviction that I believe there are things that only parents should decide, where and when and what will be taught to their children with regards to sexuality. I don't believe that teachers or politicians, and certainly not activists, have a right to be teaching our children these ideas that are contrary, like I said, to what we hold dear. And it's not just ministers are concerned, it's not just Christian parents, but many teachers and principals are also deeply concerned about these changes, and they've expressed that recently in a letter to government themselves. And so I do think it's important to understand that there is a lot of strong feeling about this, but unfortunately, and we're seeing this not just in Ireland, but in many Western nations, where you have governments who hold to a certain view, and they're pushing it in the name of tolerance. But again, tolerance has to be a two-way street. The very basis of tolerance has to be that you're entitled to your views. But in this instance, we're not, because our children are being indoctrinated into with views that we do not agree with. And many politicians are cynically saying, well, you can take your children out of school, but the reality is, in the world we're living in today, with the cost of property, etc., most parents are both working, and they're not in a position to go to the schools every now and then, to take their children out. And so it's in my opinion, it's quite cynical in that regard, because it's not an option.
There's a victimization of the children in that concept. We all know that whenever a child has to step out of class, they become the odd one out, and every child wants to fit in. Part of the whole environment and ethos of education at the minute has been, let's welcome everyone, let's accept everyone, and that's right and good. But then we're being told, well, just you take your children out of class, just you can do that, you can. But that highlights that makes them stand out, and that makes them very self-conscious.
And as you say, you can't do it for
you can't do it for maths, you can't do it for English.
Sex ed, but if you're teaching sex ed across the curriculum, then you're not able to do that. I mean, this is, your experience is very similar to what's going on in the UK. There's been a lot of pushback here from parents too, and as an MP called Miriam Cates, who's put together a dossier of some of the inappropriate materials that are being used in schools, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has promised that there'll be a review. I wonder, what response have you had so far from the media? What response have you had from the ministers?
Well, there's been a deafening silence so far from both the politicians that we sent it to the Minister for Education, Minister for Children, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach. And later this week, we're going to be sending it also to all the members of the Dáil and Senate. So I suppose maybe next week before we know really what the response is. But again, I think the issue is that unfortunately, in the name of many of these changes have been made in maybe with the best of intentions. I understand that, and but unfortunately, in the name of inclusion, it ends up causing exclusion for those who hold to a biblical view of marriage and sexuality, and in the name of tolerance, it actually ends up being intolerance. And certainly, I mean, I have 5 children myself, and I have 4 going through the secondary school system. And I'll have to be honest, there's times during the year during Pride Week when many Christian kids literally don't want to go to school because they feel like they're being bullied themselves because they don't endorse these views. And so, I mean, that's the irony of many of these changes, which are being made in the name of tolerance and inclusion, etc. But it certainly doesn't end up that way for those children that are coming from Christian homes and don't buy into this.
Okay, well, Pastor John Ahern and Reverend Mark Loughridge, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.